Listen up. Forget the romantic legends of the open road. Some semi-trucks are not built for the long haul. They are rolling financial death traps designed to bankrupt you and break your spirit. Today we are exposing the dirty secrets of the trucking industry, counting down the top 10 absolutely worst, most hated semi-trucks in United States history. These are the mechanical nightmares that left grown men stranded on the interstate with blown engines, endless repair bills, and shattered dreams. You will not believe the catastrophic multi-million-dollar disaster waiting at our #1 spot, a truck that literally destroyed thousands of careers. Hit that subscribe button right now, hold on tight, and watch until the very end to find out. Starting our countdown at number 10, we have the undisputed king of the cheap fleet specification, the Freightliner Columbia. Look, there is a reason you used to see thousands of these crowding the right lane of every interstate in America, and it was not because they were luxurious. The Columbia was designed with one primary goal in mind: keeping purchasing costs as low as humanly possible for massive corporate megafleets. But the true price of that incredibly cheap entry ticket was paid in full by the poor, exhausted company drivers who had to actually live inside them day after day. The moment you fired up a Freightliner Columbia, you were greeted by the symphony of cheap hard plastics rattling violently against each other. The interior was a masterpiece of cost-cutting. Every single panel, switch, and dashboard component felt like it was sourced from a discount toy store. And the ride quality? Absolutely brutal. Driving a Columbia without a trailer felt like riding a wooden roller coaster with square wheels. Every pothole on Interstate 40 transferred directly into your spine, leaving drivers exhausted. It was a truck that actively punished you for driving it across the country. But it was not just the noise and the spine-shattering ride, it was the complete lack of insulation. In the dead of winter, the cab felt like a rolling icebox, and in the summer, the inadequate air conditioning struggled to cool down what essentially became a fiberglass greenhouse. It was the ultimate disposable truck, a vehicle with absolutely no soul and zero driver comfort. But if you thought rattling plastics and a numb back were bad, wait until you see how a legendary American bulldog completely lost its bite at number 9. Coming in at number 9 is a massive heartbreak for old-school truckers, the Mack CHN and CX series. For decades, the Mack Bulldog hood ornament meant one thing: unstoppable, bulletproof toughness. You bought a Mack because you wanted a truck that could be driven through a solid brick wall and still make the delivery on time. But when the early 2000s rolled around and strict emissions regulations started tightening, Mack stumbled incredibly hard, and the CHN and CX series paid the ultimate price, ruining a legacy. The core of this mechanical disaster lay in the transition to early exhaust gas recirculation technology and the catastrophic VMAC electrical systems. Mack purists who were used to mechanical simplicity suddenly found themselves staring at a dashboard completely illuminated with warning lights. The early VMAC electronic control modules were notorious for unexplained, frustrating glitches. You could be cruising smoothly down the highway, and suddenly the engine would cut out, sensors would fail, and you would be left sitting on the shoulder desperately waiting for a massive tow truck. To make matters infinitely worse, the early EGR engines suffered from severe reliability issues. They ran significantly hotter, produced massive amounts of internal soot, and chewed through engine components that used to last the entire life of the truck. The legendary Mack durability seemed to vanish literally overnight. Drivers who had sworn by the Bulldog brand their entire lives felt incredibly betrayed by the factory. These trucks spent more time hooked up to a diagnostic laptop than they did hauling freight. Up next is a medium-duty disaster that quite literally shattered patience. Number 8 takes us into the medium-duty misery machine, the absolutely dreadful Sterling Acterra. If you were a local delivery driver, a beverage hauler, or ran a box truck operation in the early 2000s, just hearing the name Acterra is enough to trigger pure post-traumatic stress. Sterling, which was essentially the recycled remains of the heavy truck division from Ford bought out by Freightliner, created a vehicle that felt like it was actively trying to destroy itself from the inside out every time you turned the key. The ride quality of the sterling Acterra is the stuff of grim legends among city drivers. If you hit a standard bump in an Acterra, the shockwave would rattle your teeth and send absolutely everything in the cab flying through the air. But the real nightmare was the cab durability. These things were built so cheaply that the doors literally refused to stay aligned. You would violently slam the door shut, hit a pothole at 30 miles per hour, and the door would instantly pop open on the road. Underneath the hood, it was a constant, unrelenting maintenance nightmare. Electrical harnesses were routed extremely poorly from the factory, chafing against the metal frame and causing endless short circuits that mechanics despised. It was a truck that fleet managers abandoned as quickly as humanly possible because the downtime and constant nickel and dime repairs bled their maintenance budgets completely dry. The Acterra was universally despised by the men and women forced to bounce around inside them. Speaking of shattered things, our number 7 shattered the hearts of classic truck lovers. At number 7, we have the Kenworth T2000, affectionately or perhaps spitefully known in the American trucking world as the Dustbuster. Kenworth is supposed to be the premium standard of the highway. They build the W900, the absolute king of the road, a long-hood masterpiece of pure American iron. So, when Kenworth introduced the radically aerodynamic and bubble-shaped T2000, the traditional owner-operator crowd instantly revolted. To them, it looked like a giant plastic suppository rolling down the highway, completely betraying the classic rugged aesthetic they loved. But the pure hatred for the T2000 went far beyond its highly controversial looks. The build quality was shockingly un-Kenworth. The most infamous issue was the flimsy, poorly designed doors. They were incredibly heavy, yet somehow weak, and the weather seals degraded incredibly fast. The exact moment you hit 65 miles per hour, the wind noise screaming inside the cab was deafening. You literally had to scream at the top of your lungs just to have a basic conversation with your co-driver sitting right next to you. Furthermore, the weird aerodynamic shape created massive, dangerous blind spots, especially around the thick A-pillars. Maneuvering this plastic spaceship in a tight, crowded truck stop was an absolute nightmare for visibility. It failed to live up to the rugged premium standard, endlessly frustrating owner-operators who felt they had paid absolute luxury prices for what felt like an oversized minivan. The T2000 was a massive disappointment, and Kenworth was not the only one making aerodynamic jelly beans. Their sister company dropped a highly hated egg right at number 6. Number 6 brings us to the ultimate black sheep of the red oval family, the absolutely tragic Peterbilt 387. Just like Kenworth with the T2000, Peterbilt executives decided they desperately needed a highly aerodynamic integrated cab fleet truck to compete. And just like Kenworth, they managed to deeply alienate their core fan base. Traditional Peterbilt drivers love their massive long hoods, their 379s and 389s, dripping with chrome stacks and flat glass. The 387, however, looked exactly like a melted jelly bean, destroying the bold identity of the brand. But beneath that bubbly exterior hid a terrifying swarm of severe electrical gremlins. The Peterbilt 387 was violently plagued with multiplex wiring issues right from the assembly line. Critical dashboard gauges would drop to 0 randomly, exterior lighting circuits would violently short out, and the cab climate control system seemingly had a demonic mind of its own. On top of that, the cab ceiling was notoriously terrible. Drivers complained endlessly about heavy water leaks, literally soaking the interior during rainstorms, leading to a permanent, disgusting smell of mildew. Because of its ugly duckling status and constant electrical headaches that kept it in the shop, the 387 suffered from absolutely horrible rock-bottom resale value. Owner-operators practically could not give these things away on the used truck market. It was a failure that insulted loyal drivers while failing to capture the massive fleet market. Ugly and glitchy is one thing, but what happens when the actual manufacturer completely abandons you and your expensive truck? Number 5 is a true pathetic orphan of the highway. Rolling into the driveway at number 5 is the Sterling A-Line, a truck with a highly confusing identity and a tragic, incredibly expensive ending. When Freightliner originally bought Ford's heavy truck division, they rebranded the entire lineup as Sterling. The A-Line was essentially just a weakly rebadged Ford Aeromax, meaning it was a bizarre Frankenstein hybrid of leftover Ford parts combined with extreme Freightliner cost-cutting measures. Nobody in the industry really asked for it, and the free market treated the truck exactly as such, with pure disdain. The A-Line was an absolute masterclass in terrifying wiring nightmares. The complex electrical schematics seemed like they were aggressively drawn up by someone guessing blindly in the dark. Essential wires corroded at an alarming, unprecedented rate, and the cheap plastic dashboard components literally crumbled into dust under the brutal summer sun. It was a profoundly cheap truck, built as cheaply as possible for fleets that only cared about the lowest possible bottom line. Drivers passionately hated the cramped cab and the constant feeling of impending mechanical doom. But the real reason the A-Line easily earns the number 5 spot is what happened in 2009. Daimler, the massive parent company, completely killed the entire Sterling brand. Overnight, the brand was totally dead. Dealerships vanished instantly, and worst of all, critical parts support completely dried up. Owners were left hopelessly stranded with worthless, broken-down trucks. If you needed a proprietary cab part, you were forced to scavenge through muddy junkyards. Having no parts is rough, but number 4 introduces the true EPA 2007 emissions nightmare. Number 4 is where we officially enter the dark age of emissions regulations. The Volvo VN series, featuring the early D11 and D13 EPA 2007 engines. Back in 2007, the EPA slammed the entire trucking industry with massive new mandates, strictly forcing manufacturers to adopt complex diesel particulate filters. Volvo, despite being a highly respected global engineering powerhouse, stumbled spectacularly right out of the gate with this untested technology, unleashing a wave of absolute mechanical misery upon unsuspecting drivers across the entire continent. The early Volvo filter systems were an unmitigated daily catastrophe. The crucial filters clogged completely solid with soot constantly, way before their scheduled maintenance intervals. The fragile sensors monitoring these systems were incredibly weak, frequently throwing false error codes and forcing the engine's main computer into an instant panic. And what happened when the computer panicked? You would be hauling 80,000 pounds up a steep grade, and suddenly the engine would cut all power, violently reducing you to a crawling speed of exactly 5 miles per hour. Drivers were absolutely furious. They were spending vastly more time sitting uselessly in dealership lounges drinking stale, cold coffee than they were out on the open highway actually making money. The automatic regeneration process would fail constantly, requiring a massive, incredibly expensive tow to a certified Volvo mechanic. It was a technological nightmare that made grown men scream in rage at their steering wheels. But if you think Volvo issues were a massive headache, wait until you see the European engine that devastated classic American dashboards. Taking the highly contested number 3 spot is the early Paccar MX13 engine, specifically when it was first shoved into the iconic, beautiful long hoods of Kenworths and Peterbilts. Paccar confidently decided to bring their European-designed DAF engine over to the States to aggressively compete in the heavy-duty market. On paper, they promised it was lightweight, extremely quiet, and highly fuel-efficient. In harsh reality, during those early years, it was nothing but a rolling check-engine light generator that drove American mechanics completely insane. The forced integration of this highly complex European engine into the traditional American chassis was disastrously far from smooth. The dashboard of an early MX13-powered Peterbilt literally lit up like a Christmas tree on a weekly basis. The sensors were notoriously oversensitive, and the complicated after-treatment systems were incredibly prone to sudden catastrophic failure. Fuel injectors would violently stick open, expensive wiring harnesses would literally melt under the hood, and diagnosing the root cause required highly proprietary software that constantly frustrated independent diesel shops. But the deepest wound was the massive personal betrayal felt by American truckers. Hard-working guys who proudly spent $150,000 on a gorgeous brand-new truck reasonably expected the traditional bulletproof reliability of a Cummins. Instead, they received an overly complicated, highly fragile power plant that left them hopelessly stranded at way stations across the country. It severely tarnished the gold standard reputation of Paccar. Check engine lights are highly annoying, but our top two literally bankrupted entire trucking companies. Brace yourself for number 2. We have arrived at the runner-up for the most hated truck in history. Number 2, the infamous International LoneStar, heavily powered by the catastrophic MaxxForce engine. Let us start with the massive elephant in the room, the polarizing design. International desperately tried to create a cool retro Art Deco highway cruiser. What they tragically ended up with was a bizarre mashup that looked exactly like a Harley-Davidson motorcycle had crashed violently head-on into a Chrysler PT Cruiser. The massive chrome grille was highly controversial. People absolutely loathed it. But the ugly truth was that the massive grille was functionally terrible for basic aerodynamics, and the truck itself was incredibly, unnecessarily heavy. It actively burned through diesel fuel at an alarming, budget-destroying rate. But the real crime, the absolute unforgivable mechanical sin of the LoneStar, was what was hiding underneath that massive hood, the engine. While other manufacturers were struggling to perfect DPF technology, International foolishly doubled down on an advanced EGR-only strategy, desperately trying to cool massive amounts of exhaust and shove it back inside. The result was an absolute mechanical bloodbath. The internal coolers violently ruptured under pressure, relentlessly leaking thick coolant directly into the engine cylinders. The engines literally choked to death on their own excessive soot. Crucial valves snapped cleanly in half, expensive turbos blew up in spectacular, fiery fashion, and the repair downtime was measured in brutal months, not just days. The LoneStar was a heavy flop, but it shares a dark multi-million-dollar secret with our undisputed #1 pick that completely changed trucking history forever. And finally, the undisputed champion of pure, unadulterated disaster. The most hated, universally despised, and financially ruinous semi-truck in American history is #1, the International ProStar with the MaxxForce engine. If the LoneStar was an ugly truck with a bad engine, the ProStar was the massive fleet-wide plague that nearly destroyed Navistar and forcefully drove thousands of honest, hard-working truckers straight into personal bankruptcy. It was supposed to be the ultimate aerodynamic fleet truck, but it became an absolute weapon of financial mass destruction. The engine inside was fundamentally, fatally flawed from the very blueprint. By arrogantly refusing to use liquid urea like the rest of the industry, the advanced EGR system continuously pumped an ungodly amount of raw, abrasive soot directly back through the engine block. The internal oil would turn to thick, gritty sludge in record time. Crucial valves stuck completely open. Entire engine blocks cracked violently under the intense thermal stress. Tow trucks were running 24 hours a day just pulling completely dead ProStars off the shoulder of Interstate 80. The fallout was completely unprecedented in United States trucking history. Dealerships instantly ran out of basic replacement parts, leaving innocent drivers stranded in cheap motels for weeks while their massive truck payments still came due. Colossal class action lawsuits were rightfully filed against the company, claiming they explicitly knew the engines were defective before they even sold them. Fleets lost millions in revenue, and independent drivers literally lost their family homes. The ProStar is not just a bad truck, it is an infamous, traumatizing scar on the industry. So there you have it, the metal graveyard of the 10 most hated semi-trucks in United States history. From rattling plastic dashboards to billion-dollar engine lawsuits, these broken rigs clearly prove that not all heavy metal is created equal. Did you somehow survive driving the #1 spot? Did a MaxxForce ever leave you stranded and screaming on the side of the highway? Let us know your absolute worst trucking nightmares in the comments down below. Smash that subscribe button, hit the like, and keep the shiny side up.